Hey y'all, welcome back to MovementLink. So, how low should you squat? Okay, are we going hips below the knees? Are we going partial squats? It really completely depends on what your goals are and what your body is capable of and what you're doing that day. So before we get into what full range of motion is and where you should be squatting if you're trying to squat to full range of motion, I just want to kind of get rid of the myth that if we're only squatting to here, this isn't good. So the thing and the mistake so many people make in the fitness industry is they go all in with one style or one implement, the kettlebell, and they're just all in with the kettlebell, and they forget how beneficial and how there's pros and cons to all of these different things. So what we see so often is that if we squat partially and then come back up, we can really overload that position, meaning we can put maybe 100, 200 more pounds of weight on your back. And that overload can be so good to stimulate muscle growth and strength. And also, if you start looking at what positions do we use when we're playing sport, it's these positions. Rarely are we playing a sport, and rarely do we need to be really strong out of these bottom positions. So again, I'm not saying that we should spend all of our time here, because we need our muscles and our joints to be able to go through full ranges of motion. We need stability in these positions, and we need strength in these positions. But we shouldn't just say that these aren't helpful because we're not going down low, because they do have their place in training, especially depending on what your goals are. Okay, so that aside, how low should you go if we're talking about squatting through a full range of motion? Again, now we have to talk about what your goals are. So are we training for CrossFit competition or powerlifting competition where we have a clear standard? And their standard is the hip crease has to go below the knee. Okay? So the other thing with that standard is if you're going to compete at a high level in that, it's actually a detriment to you to squat lower than right at that 90-degree point, because now you're going to have the weakest part of your movement and you're going to have all of this extra energy and time wasted. So if we're talking sport specific and sports like CrossFit and powerlifting, you have to learn how to squat right to that 90-degree. Of course, we wouldn't do all of our training right there, but as we get closer and closer to competition, we'd get more and more specific, and that specific squat would go right to that 90. So here's kind of the trick, and this is where people get messed up, is I hear that standard, that's a competition standard of hip below the knee, and they think that no matter what, for a squat to be a squat, you got to get your hip below the knee. Well, first of all, again, if we're only squatting partially, there's a time and place for that. But also, if you don't have the mobility and we have to do weird things, if we're missing ankle range and we have to do weird things to get down there, then we're missing the point. Again, if you're in a competition, the point is to hit the standards of the competition, and we got to do that. But for 99% of us who are just trying to get healthy and fit for real life and the real world and longevity and feeling good and getting rid of aches and pains, how low do we squat? We squat as low as you can with perfect technique. Okay, so I know that's real simple. It's going to be different. Usually in the beginning, for most people, it's somewhere about right here. And then if they work on it and work on it and work on it and work on it slowly over time, it builds and builds and builds. So that's really what we're looking for. There is no standard for how low is. It all depends on what your goals are, what you're doing that day, what your mobility is. And my recommendation is most of your squatting should be through a full range of motion, and that's going to be different. It's going to look different for absolutely everybody. One last consideration too is people have different lengths of body parts, which makes visually what full range of motion and stuff looks like very different. It makes what your ankles need to do, your hips need to do, it makes all these things different. So what I don't want you getting into, if you're just looking for longevity, feeling good, transferring the stuff over into sport, I don't want you getting into, so say flat feet, pointed straight, everything nice and tight. say we get stuck right here, okay? And then to get lower, we can turn the feet out and go wider, and now all of a sudden, bam, we're way down here. So now we just lost all of this skill transfer and the actual functionality of it for the sake of getting lower. So that's the huge mistake we see people make, is they put too much focus and emphasis on breaking 90, and they're like, oh, well, if I go wider and turn it out, oh, nice, now I can get down there, as opposed to developing these positions that are going to have that better transfer out. All right, so just some stuff to think about. Talk to y'all soon.